Hello, my name is Elizabeth Ross. I'm a producer and reporter here at WGBH. My experience of trying to care for my parents, my mother and my father, has really been an experience trying to care for them from overseas, which has been really challenging, very difficult, with two parents who are unwell and who live in different countries. I live here in the Boston area. My father lives in the London area in the UK, and my mum lives in Argentina with my sister. The current situation with my dad is that he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease about 13 years ago. He's currently in the hospital right now. He has been for the last 2.5 weeks and has been really unwell. He's picking up a little bit now, but he's been living in an assisted living home for the last 13 years that he really likes. He actually really likes living there. And just this morning I learned that they're not going to be able to take him back home again. They're not going to be able to assist with his care anymore. They've just told me this morning, I received an email saying that he's just not well enough to be able to go back to that assisted living home, and they don't have the staff to accommodate his needs, that he really will need to be moved to a nursing home. And it's been just very difficult the last few weeks with him being in hospital in London, because whenever I call the hospital to try to speak to staff, they have very strict rules about information that they can give you over the telephone. And they, even though I say I'm his daughter, I'm his next of kin, can I have more information about how my father's doing? They're just able to give me very little bits of information and not really tell me very much at all about how he's doing, which is really tough. The wonderful thing is that I do have a fantastic cousin and an uncle who have been visiting my dad regularly and basically calling me, emailing me, and letting me know how my dad's doing. So they have just been fantastic. So that's been my support, and they've really just sort of stepped up to the plate to help me. My mum, as I mentioned, she is also unwell. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about 3 years ago and was living in England. My sister had been living in England as well. So in terms of caring for my father, they had been the primary ones caring for him. About 3 years ago, my mum, as I said, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And at that point, it was a very critical situation for my sister and I. We had to very quickly move back to England for a period of time and sort out her situation, which meant taking her to doctors in the London area where she was living, and trying to decide what we were going to do to manage her care situation. She'd been very well really up until that point. We'd noticed a few problems over a few years and we'd been worried about her, but about 3 years ago it sort of became a critical situation where we knew we had to do something to manage her care. And at that point, in that my sister was living in Argentina, I'm living here in the States, we decided between my sister and I that we would try and manage her care, which has been a real challenge. It's been the hardest thing we've probably ever had to do. My mum lived in the same home that we grew up in for about 30 years, and she had lots and lots of things. And she expressed to us that she basically wanted to keep everything with her if she was going to move overseas, including her piano, all her paintings, her coin collection, everything that she owned. She didn't want to give up anything, from her kitchen mixer to her toaster to everything that she just loved in her home. And it was hard for her to leave. But at the same time, she did express to us that she wanted to live with us, with her family, that she didn't want to be on her own anymore. And she really couldn't live on her own anymore. It wasn't safe. She'd already had to give up driving her car, and just taking care of herself anymore on her own just wasn't an option. So that's when we started the process of moving her to Argentina, getting a container, moving all her things, including the piano, to Argentina, which was just really hard. It was not easy, and it's been a lot of stress, particularly on my sister, moving her. We both have young children, so in terms of just arranging all of this and taking care of our young children at the same time was really tough. But we did it, and about 2.5 years later, my mum has finally moved into a 2-family home in Argentina. My sister will be moving into that home with her 2 and we've arranged carers to be with my mother and to take care of her. And my mother has a really good life there. I mean, the weather is warm. She likes living there, even though it's been a huge change from living in England. She did express to us that she wanted to be with us. So she spent time there, and she's also spent several months over the last few years living with us here as well in the States. And I've really learned a lot through that experience of just spending that time with her. It's been very special. And in terms of any advice that I think I might offer, would be really to speak with your parents while they're well and younger about their wishes and what they might want for when they get a little bit older. I mean, with both my parents becoming ill in their 50s and in their 60s, that was quite young and came as a sort of a shock to my sister and I. And we were able to speak with my mum about her wishes, even when she was beginning to get worse. And she was able to communicate with us about wanting to be with family and how important that was. And we knew that. And you may not always be able to fulfill their wishes as they would want. I mean, you'll try your best, and you have to protect yourself against burnout and the stresses that come with that. But I think it's important to have that conversation with your parents when they're young and well, and get a sense from them what they may want from you and what you may have to prepare yourself for. The other thing I've really learned is that you have to be an advocate for your parents. I've had that experience of going back to the hospital with my dad, where hospital staff told us just a few years back that they'd pretty much given up on my dad and that they weren't really going to try very hard to look after him, was really the message that my sister and I got. This was a few years ago, and we had to be advocates for my dad and step up and say, look, this is what we want you to try for our dad, and to work very hard to look after him. And he did recover, and he pulled through that. But I have to say, my sister and I physically being there at the hospital and being advocates for him was a very important lesson that we had to learn. And I think that's what's so hard for me now with my dad being in England and me being here, is knowing I have to be an advocate again for him. Which is why I've booked a ticket to go visit him, to spend some time, and to try and help the situation the best that I can. But obviously living overseas, there are limitations, and it can be really hard.